Test, 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 test. Okay, cool. Hands.
Hello. Welcome to the latest installment of the Zell Visiting Writers Series, bringing the world of contemporary literature to Ann Arbor. If you could please take a moment to silence your cell phones. Tonight, we are delighted to host a conversation between Eileen Miles, Lisa Crone, and Professor Holly Hughes, who will guide us through the evening's event.
Thank you, Maya. And thank you all for coming. I am Holly Hughes, and much to my surprise, I am a professor here at the Penny W. Stamp School of Art and Design with appointments in women's studies. It's got to go back. Yeah, in the light. That's good. It's a dark time, but not that dark. Where I enjoy dry appointments in women's studies and theater and drama. And I direct the BFA in Inner Arts Performance. And I'm grateful, yay! I'm grateful to all of you for coming out to celebrate the publication by the University of Michigan Press of Memories of the Revolution, the first 10 years of the Wow Cafe Theater, a book I co-edited with performer and playwright Carmelita Tropicana and Jill Dolan, who is the Annan Professor of English at Princeton, where she also serves as Dean of the college. And there's more than 24 contributors to the book. I wish they're all here in spirit. And I am so delighted to have two incredible artists who inspire, provoke, and blow my mind whenever I look at their work, and I am lucky to count as friends, Lisa Crone and Eileen Miles. And I'm going to introduce both of them, but first I just want to thank everybody who made this visit possible, the Penny W. Stamp School of Art and Design, the Institute for Research on Women and Gender, the Zell Visiting Writers Series, the School of Music, Theater, and Dance, the Institute for Humanities, and Arts at Michigan, who all provided funding. And then a really special thanks to the fabulous event planners who pulled this all together, Maya West of the Zell Writers Series, and to Heidi Bennett of the Institute for Research on Women and Gender. Woo! Thanks to Michigan Media for live streaming this event, which will be archived, and to UMA for the use of the Stern Auditorium. What we're going to do tonight is I'm going to do what I am already doing, which is introducing the event and then offering an introduction to WOW, and hopefully lead into the work of the other two artists. And we'll go in alphabetical order with Lisa and then Eileen, and we'll wrap up. Maybe we'll have time for a couple of questions, and we have book signing upstairs. Thank you, Literati, for providing books. So, Lisa Crone is a playwright and performer who grew up in Lansing, Michigan, and began her career doing Purim plays at her synagogue with titles such as Gunfight at the OK Kibbutz, and we all remember that, and Broadway Melodies of 400 BCE. She moved to New York in 1984, where she had the great good fortune to stumble into the Wow Cafe, where she became a founding member of the collaborative theater company, The Five Lesbian Brothers. And she also started making solo work. She wrote the musical Fun Home with composer Janine Tesori, and the national tour of Fun Home happens to be starting performances tonight in the Fisher Theater in Detroit, and it runs through next weekend. And there are $25 rush tickets for students and educators on the day of the show, 2 hours prior to showtime, cash only, 2 ticket max with valid ID. Valid ID? Who is that? Go and see it. Okay. It's an incredible show. Eileen Miles is an award-winning writer and poet who has produced more than 20 volumes of poetry, fiction, nonfiction, libretti, plays, and performance pieces over the past 3 decades. Novelist Dennis Cooper calls them one of the savviest intellects in contemporary literature. In 2012, they received a Guggenheim to complete, I should speak into the mic, I'm getting that feeling, to complete Afterglow, a memoir which gives a real and fantastic account of a dog's life. Their most recent publications, a reissue of 1994's Chelsea Girls and the collection I Must Be Living Twice, both from HarperCollins, received wide acclaim, really wide. The New York Times, Guardian, New Yorker. It was so great. I felt like every time I opened up the New York Times, I would see something about Eileen, and that was great. That was a reason to get through that news cycle. And last Sunday, the Times named I Must Be Living Twice one of its 100 notable books of 2016. Woo! What? Next Sunday too. Okay. Oh shit! Next Sunday a poem too. So it's it's a reason to keep going at least for a few more days. I'm going to just say a little bit about the WOW Cafe, which stands for Women's One World. It began as an international festival in 1980. It was organized by 4 women. They had no money, but they had a tremendous network of international women artists. They took over the East Village in bars and cafes, from the Ukrainian National Home to a place that was called University of the Streets. And then the WOW Festival, after 2 years, gave birth to an actual physical space, first a tiny storefront, and then a loft-size theater that in perhaps 1982, which still exists. It's still around. It's the oldest continually running lesbian / feminist / trans art / performance space in the world, according to me. Since no one is a lesbian anymore, I get to define that this is a fact. Okay. And last night we had a conversation about whether that made WOW a millennial or not, and whether she had the characteristics of a millennial. I know she's not particularly tech savvy from working on the book. The contributors sent me like these one-of-a-kind precious objects, including their handwritten play scripts. And I started to say, maybe you could scan this. And I would get these replies like, I don't scan, that seemed to be written in human blood, perhaps my human blood. And that's what I loved about the place. It's an unfunded, anarchic place supported by the sweat equity of its members. I was trying to think about what to say about doing an event called Memories of the Revolution at this moment in time after this election. And I think if I were some of my friends in this audience, you'd have something really smart to help frame it. But I thought about when I came to WOW in 1982 was another really terrible moment in America. And I was really lost. I was lost in every way that I could be lost, and it was a dawn of just a horrible moment where there was a new president that seemed just bent on wrecking everything, and he did a great job of wrecking everything. And what I found at WOW didn't erase the horror of what Reagan gave birth to. But I found something, some partial revolution, something in that room, at least a way to not go crazy, a way to sort of take anger and despair and turn it into something with some glitter and maybe a song you could tap your toe to, something that might dazzle and disrupt. And I don't think that bad times make for good art, but bad times do remind us of why art, and particularly I would say live art that calls us to be together and come together as a temporary community, and why that is so important. It reminds us, as Audre Lorde said, that poetry is not a luxury. So WOW is a secret. You have to know what you're looking for to find it. It's November 2013. I'm in the East Village. I'm looking for WOW. I'm looking for a place I went to for years, and I can't find it. I walk by it several times. And I remember how I mourned that we were unmarked, unrecognized, but also how happy I was that no one came to the door who didn't really want to be there. There was no one who came in the door to tell us that what we were doing was bad, trivial, offensive, a waste. Those words were drowned out by the sounds of women trying to learn their lines written moments before, if at all, by double entendres volleying back and forth over the sound of power tools, by fights over who was and was not a member, who was and was not a man, and what that meant, and who would take out the trash. I ring the buzzer. For most of my time at WOW, you stood in the street. You called up. We had our own mating call that you had to send out loud enough to be heard over the cacophony of the Republic of 4th Street, and you would wait till somebody would pry open this very reluctant window and drop out a sock that had a key inside it. You had to catch it or find it and then go up the 4 flights. There was no foyer, no space to receive you. You were inside WOW or you were outside WOW, no liminal space. And I remember how lucky we felt to have this space on East 4th Street. We were struggling to pay the rent on East 11th Street in a tiny cafe space, and Peggy Shaw, a formidable force, had worn Cooper Square Union down, so now we had a cheaper space with a long-term lease, and eventually in 2000, WOW was able to buy this space. New York is still a city full of secret spaces, sometimes sweatshops and the spaces of too many people crowded together in too little space, but also a sweetness of secret space. Clubs, speakeasies, abandoned piers enlivened by other species of abandonment. As E.B. White said at the beginning of one of my favorite books about New York, "Here is New York," on any person who desires such queer prizes, New York will bestow the gift of loneliness and the gift of privacy. And everybody came to WOW looking for their queer prize. Some from other parts of the country, some from other parts of the city just a few blocks away. They were all looking for this place where a wild yodel could be heard. They were in search of a heavy, unmarked door that would let us in while keeping the rest of the world out. I follow the laughter up to the stairs, even though the elevator works now. Inside, WOW looks the way it always looked. The floor looks like it really needs a coat of paint. It was probably just painted. That's the way the floor is. The ceiling is too low for theater. I only know this because I've done what's called real theater. And I know that there are people who are over 5 feet 2 who do and see real theater, and that there might be lights that would enhance real theater. But for 30-some years, this very low ceiling, small space has been enough. And then there's a dressing room, and off the dressing room, there's a curtain that hides a toilet. There's no sink, just a toilet, a tiny window, and a list. And on the list, they ask some questions like, what is WOW for? What is WOW not for? And according to the list, WOW is for community. It's about social change. It's about resistance. And it's about hooking up. Some things have never changed. I don't think this is a ranked list. What WOW is not for racism, for prejudice. Nothing mentions on this list anything about like success in any conventional sense. And you could ask the question, does conventional sense of success matter here? Is it a kind of taboo? Or is it less important than changing the world and having sex? I don't know. That's a reasonable question. Every Tuesday night, the collective has a meeting. I'm the only one there from the first 10 years. In the beginning, WOW was mostly, but not entirely, a white group, but now it's much more diverse. It's also trans-inclusive. several women of color move with the confidence that this is their space. In the past, the way that the mostly white group at WOW would deal with our desire for greater diversity was to allow women of color organizations to use our space. They were guests with all of the problems that implies. And I'm happy to see this change. I have no idea what brought it about. A larger cultural shift? Did the move towards a more structured organization within WOW or some other policy shift make women of color feel that they could claim WOW now too? There's a woman I know named Mimi who's a director and a scholar who is facilitating the meeting. She has to kind of manage the flirtation, the gossip, the planning of the meetings that precede the meeting itself, and she is the sole representative of the demographic north of 45 besides myself. And I'm a little uncomfortable when I'm there because this isn't really a place for spectators. You're supposed to make yourself useful. And I can't even imagine sitting on the floor. If I sit on the floor, I'm not going to be able to get off of the floor. Sitting in the folding chair is a challenge. It feels a little bit like a Marina Abramovich endurance piece. I don't get any of the jokes. I get none of the jokes because they're all jokes that grow out of sharing a space together, of long nights, of bad coffee, too much beer, hot glue stuck to your hand. But also being an outsider is a common WOW experience. There's a stinging no, a series of stinging no's at the center of everyone's tale who passed through here. We might call this home, but we were rarely at home. In the scripts and the interviews, I kept reading the sentence, but I had to leave some part of me at the door. I hear how we were still outsiders even as we claimed the space. And perhaps I hear that we lost the ability to be inside a home, to be a part of any kind of family, chosen or otherwise. We were kind of feral. We were animals that lived on the sides and edges of things, not wild, not domesticated. It was a feral world that we made. So when it's time to say my name, I'm not surprised when no one knows who I am, but Mimi's kind of embarrassed. And she said, oh, Holly is one of the founders. She helped start the place, which is kind of like saying she's mom and she showed up for the rent or she's going to turn on the lights and the party's over. And this woman just gives me such the stink eye. I mean, lesbian stink eye is in a whole other category of stink eye. Lesbian New York stink eye. And one of WOW's most radical defining features is the absence of gatekeepers bringing their history, their rules with them. You don't need to know anyone to get your foot in the door. You just need to know an address. And once you're inside this place, I think, now as 35 years ago, you were free to be fully young in a way that I think queer women don't get to be very often, to believe that you are the first one to have this thought, to say this thing, you get to name the other animals. The book, the history that I want to offer in this book is a different kind of history. I think hopefully it is something useful, partial, fragmentary, glittery. It unfolds in lesbian time. It starts and ends in the so-called golden age of the East Village art scene, a very dark kind of gold that could be found at that time. A moment when movement feminism collapsed as a popular movement that could spin off songs on the radio like We Are Family, and just as the emergence of queer theory and ethnic studies as academic disciplines. So I offered this book of brightly colored jerry-rig items for which no instructions is given. It's meant to be played with, open, use it. I hope this history can work for you. Thank you. And now I'm going to turn it over to Lisa Crone.
I had such an urge the whole time you were up here to sort of move this mic into greater light. I feel like that's a little lighter. Martha Graham said, "The center of the stage is wherever I am." So, Paula Vogel says that every theater artist, every playwright certainly has a God play. And that's the play that when you saw it, it rocked your world. It changed your conception of what theater could be, and it set you on your course. And my God play was Split Britches by the Split Britches Company, Peggy Shaw, Lois Weaver, and Deb Margolin. If there is a second God play, I think I can safely say it was The Lady Dick by Holly Hughes. Going to WOW was the luckiest thing that ever happened to me. I sort of stumbled there through coincidence, and it changed my life. And I've talked about it a lot and written about it a lot. Particularly when I talk to students, I talk about it a lot since it was my seminal experience of sort of reframing, the educational reframing that set the course for the rest of my life. And it is the touchstone. My experiences there remain the touchstone for my creative life. So so what I'm going to share with you today are some things that I have written in the past, and then I keep sort of as my life changes, as the world changes, that foundational experience plays itself out in my mind and in my thinking in different ways. And so some of that is in this writing as well. We'll see how coherent it is. But I want to start by indulging myself with one of a story that I really like to tell that is interesting to me because it holds both the sort of unexpected professional success that resulted to me from WOW. Maybe I should, is it better if I'm a little bit further from that? Yeah. But also, I think holds that which, the sort of assumptions that WOW existed in the face of. So when I was first doing my play, Well, at the Public Theater, it was one of the first previews in that play. The great Jane Howdy-Shell played my mother, and it was a very early preview. There was Q&A afterwards, and there was a woman in the audience who raised her hand. She was probably in her, let's say, mid-50s. She was kind of wan. She had kind of lank brown hair. She looked a little bit done in by life, and she was extremely emotional. She had a hard time articulating what she was feeling, but she said, I don't really know what to say. I'm having so many feelings. Having just seen this play, it just brought up so many things for me. Because when I was young, I wanted a life in the theater. And I didn't do that. I had a whole other life because until tonight, until I saw your show, I didn't realize that you don't have to be pretty to be an actress. And everybody laughed and she looked completely confused, and I said, I'm so glad we could clarify that for you. I didn't really know what to say. Anyway. So I also went to college in the Midwest. I went to Kalamazoo College. One of my professors from Kalamazoo College is here. Also, Holly went to Kalamazoo College a few years before me. And that was a place at that time in the theater department where, can you hear me without the mic, or do I need the, is that all right? Yeah, okay. For the live streaming, all right. My mother's watching, so I better talk into the mic for the live streaming. Okay. In the theater department, it was a very small Midwestern theater department where professors would say things to us like, if there's anything you can do besides theater, do it. There's no future in the, if you're lucky, you'll get a job on a cruise ship. That's my advice to you. I was told I was a character actress, which I realized at some point was actually a code word for lesbian. I went to the head of our theater department one time to ask him why I hadn't been cast in a part that I thought was perfect for me, and he said to me, well, Lisa, obviously you don't convey any sexuality on stage, which is a kind of an appalling thing to say to an 18-year-old girl. Also, it wasn't true. Of course, I did have a sexuality, but apparently muff diving had not been on his list of qualifications for sexuality. I was cast in the school's production of the screwball comedy You Can't Take It With You. I was cast as Reba, who, if you know the play, you know is the Black Maid. Concerned as they were about racism at that time at Kalamazoo College, they changed the ethnicity of my character from black to Irish. They didn't, however, change any of the dialogue. So I still had to say lines like, yes, I sure is glad I's colored. But I had to say it with a brogue, so it sounded a little something like, yes, sir, I sure is glad I's colored. In spite of all efforts, though, to discourage me, I charged, largely unconsciously, toward a life in the theater. Theater is a vocation, I believe. You don't choose it, it chooses you. And though all indicators confirmed what I had been explicitly told, that there was no path available to me in the theater, I moved to New York anyway, not because I thought I could prove that prognosis wrong, but because I couldn't help it. I am just also going to indulge myself again for 1 second. When I first started performing at WOW, I used a lot of props. I had a lot of visual aids, and I would like to show you, when I came to New York, the resume picture that I brought with me. This is my first resume picture. See, I was about 18 years old and yet somehow looked like a young B. Arthur. Or maybe a middle-aged B. Arthur. It's the neck scarf that I think is particularly surprising. My special skills, dialects, as you have seen. Stage combat, all right, and historic dance. I don't even know what that is. I don't know what that is. Okay. When I got to New York, I spent the first 10 years there supporting myself as an office temp, mostly in corporate law offices. It was not an ideal fit. The other secretaries were mostly women from Queens on Long Island in New Jersey. And there was a thing that happened in that setting that was quite confusing to me coming from the Midwest, which is that they would refer to their friends, their women friends, as their girlfriends, which I guess is the way that word was used then, and probably still used in the East Coast. But in the Midwest, at that time anyway, girlfriend meant a romantic relationship, but I didn't know that. And so I'd be chatting with these women over the coffee machine in the lunchroom, whatever, and they'd be talking about their girlfriends. They'd be like, what did you do last night? I went to the movies with my girlfriend, and I'd perk right up. I was like, girlfriend? Girlfriend? Oh my God, these women are all lesbians. This isn't the way the lesbians look in the Midwest. You know, they've got the big hair and the nails, which seems kind of dangerous, but I don't know how they do it here. And I got so excited, and I kept trying to join in on their conversations. And I was like, well, last night my girlfriend and I tried to get pregnant with a turkey baster, you know? And I'd go from job to job to job. I couldn't figure out what was going on. Anyway, in those early days, I was mostly auditioning for equity showcases, which are very low budget, very speculative types of productions, often put together by people with questionable talent and very unrealistic ideas about their chances for success. And I was cast in a couple of these shows. One of them was called Trees. When I auditioned for it, I thought, oh, trees, that sounds, I don't know, like the cherry orchard or something. Must be sort of kind of deep and Chekhovian. I was cast in Trees, which turned out to be a musical about a group of trees who wanted to become Christmas trees. And there were songs like Diddly Doop De Doo, kind of Christmas, and Ach du kleiner Christmas. And the producers of Trees were very excited about this show and very optimistic about its prospects, and they told us that it was soon going to be moving to Broadway. And we were like, okay, it's October, so this is going to happen soon, right? Because after Christmas, there might be a little bit of a relevance problem. And they were like, but that's the beauty of trees, because as trees in nature change with the seasons, so will this musical about trees change with the holidays. And so we've already planned our 4th of July trees and our Halloween trees. And they were very excited about Arbor Day, needless to say. So this was the landscape of professional theater as I understood it at that time. And then I stumbled into WOW, where I saw theater unlike anything I could have conjured in my wildest imagination. It was electric, sexy, funny, shocking, embracing. It was extraordinarily alive. It was a theater where the sexuality of women like me was completely legible. But really, the thunderbolt effect of WOW went even deeper than that for me. I'm going to read you a short piece that I wrote some time ago that describes how profound that revelation was for me. I go back to a moment of crisis when I was in college. I was a senior in college, sitting on the edge of my dorm room bed in the middle of the day, paralyzed by the sudden realization that the extraordinary world I had just begun to discover, the world of theater, was closed to me. During the preceding 3.5 years, I had honed my talents, playing an array of bit parts as old women, neighbor ladies, and the occasional animal. But this was my senior spring, and I had paid my dues, and the show was William Inge's Picnic. And the lead role of Picnic is Rosemary, an old maid, which, come on, is totally a lead role for a lesbian. But the part went to a skinny sophomore, and I was instead given the part of Mrs. Potts, the elderly neighbor. I had no actual scenes, just diagonal crosses, where I would utter quick but pivotal phrases like, "I baked a Lady Baltimore cake." And at the end of the play, all the women sit in the yard. They're devastated because the young man who had wandered into the town and given them a reason to live has wandered off again. And that's when Mrs. Potts has her big speech. Quote, "He walked through the door, and suddenly everything was different. Everything he did reminded me there was a man in the house, and it seemed good, and that reminded me I'm a woman. And that seemed good too." So on this day, I had fallen into despair because it had suddenly dawned on me that this speech summed up everything I might ever be given to do in the theater. I would never play a character who grapples with work or love or friendship or politics or religion or sex or power. My job would be to reflect upon the actions and importance of the male characters in plays where the explication of one type of character seemed so often to blithely hinge on the diminishment of whole classes of others. Theater had exploded into my consciousness as the most compelling, powerful thing I could imagine, but it was becoming clear to me that this power to affect, to transform, was in someone else's hands, and the best I could ever hope for was to catch a ride on someone else's view of the world. I have a picture of what would have happened to me if I hadn't stumbled into the WOW Cafe. And I see a woman living a very difficult life. A woman worn down by her constant battle with a world either ignoring her rage or belittling it. But I was saved by a theatrical thunderbolt that hit me one night in 1985 when I saw Peggy Shaw, Lois Weaver, and Deb Margolin perform their show, Split Britches. I saw in that show a piece of theater that made visible the daily lives of previously invisible people by means of a glorious, wild, paradigm-shifting theatricality. There, Peggy Shaw, who in my Midwestern theater department would not even have gotten the old lady parts, was conveying a powerful and inarguable sexuality that had never been dreamt of on the Playhouse stage at Kalamazoo College. The Split Britches Company taught me the most important lesson I ever learned about theater. It is ours. This is what I learned at WOW, and it's the greatest lesson one can learn about the theater. Theater is not made by institutions. It is ours. This is very important, and I want you to remember it if you're a young theater maker. Theater is the art form that gives us total, unfettered imaginative power to create the world on our own terms. We who make theater may be shut out of institutions, but all that means is that we have less access to material resources. And that's not nothing, but it has no effect on our ability to make theater. Material resources are extra. The heart of theater is the electric, imaginative connection between a production and an audience. The cutting edge of culture is always located outside of institutions. That's because it's generally invisible to them. Once the new frontiers of culture have developed and been cultivated at the margins, it's the job of institutions, and it's important that institutions spread those new ideas and images more broadly. But institutions are never at the forefront. They often think they are. You see this phenomenon a lot, where institutional theaters notice there's something live and interesting happening on the margins, they put it in their theater, and then they somehow think they invented it, or they made it possible. And sometimes you hear pronouncements from institutions about how they are necessary because without them there would be no art. Institutions are not unimportant, and there can be very productive relationships between artists and institutions, but they are not enabling anyone to make art. And art is, by its very nature, particular and individual. In other words, art is anti-institutional. I bring this up now because, like many of you, I'm sure, I feel a great deal of dread about what's coming. Since this election, I've been asked, and I have asked others, what role will theater play in the coming years? What role should theater play in the coming years? And I don't know. But it feels to me like it's going to be a place for us to assert very basic rights. Freedom of assembly, for one. It will be a place to assert our right to individual and particular human expressiveness. And perhaps most importantly, it will be a place to claim a view of the world, to assert a view of the world that is at odds with the official version. There was an electric connection at the Wow Cafe between our audiences and our shows. And I'm thinking now that that was at least partially made out of the exercise of some of those rights. We were invisible to the greater world. We were illegal. The fact of our existence was at odds with the official version of the world. And yet we came together in that small room night after night and showed that the official version was a lie. I fear that the assertion of truths that deviate from the official line is going to become even more difficult than that in this new regime. There's a passage from one of my favorite musicals, Passing Strange, that keeps going through my head these days. The central character of Passing Strange is called the Youth. And in this scene, he's sitting in a van parked on Arlington Hill in LA, looking down over the city, and being schooled in life by his mentor, Mr. Franklin, the church choir director, who is also a closeted gay man. Mr. Franklin tells the youth that he has to travel, he has to see the world, he has to go anywhere, but he must get out of South Central and see the world. And then he describes his own life this way. He says, "You could say the Holy Father is paying me to not be myself. I'd like to say that I'm chained to the church piano, but that would be an insult to actual slaves. Because you see, my boy, slaves got options, you dig? I'm talking escape, revolt, death. But cowards ain't got shit. Cowards only have consequences." I've been thinking a lot about courage these days. I fear that we're all going to need a lot of it in this new regime. I've always had a fear about myself that I don't have that kind of courage. That if push came to shove, I'd be the person in the lifeboat yelling, "Throw that baby overboard! That old woman looks weak. Push her, save ourselves." But the thing about moral choices is that they're only really clear when they're not yours. I'm trying to shore up my courage. Paul Tillich says that courage is being your essential self. Often when people talk to me about Fun Home, when they interview me about Fun Home, they describe the character of Bruce Bechtel, Allison's closeted father, as a victim of his time. And it's a framing that always sticks in my craw. For one thing, a victim, a person with no choices, isn't a very interesting, dramatic character. But more than that, Bruce could have come out He would have had to give up a version of his life, but he could have done it. Lots of people did it. Was it hard? Yes, it was, but they lived in truth anyway. Peggy Shaw did it. Lois Weaver did it. Holly did it. Eileen did it. I hope that in the coming days, weeks, months, and years, I can live up to that example. Thanks.
Hi, that was incredible. Thanks, Lisa. And it's so great to be here. And I mean, for several reasons. One is that that I love Holly and WOW, and I've always had a funny relationship to WOW, which is that I always felt like I was like the poet mascot, you know. Because I would go to a lot of plays at WOW, and it was sort of my definition of like sort of East Village lesbian and women's theater, and I felt like I got so many great ideas and so many just you know, like pleasant, dirty feelings and sense of community, and you know, a place to go, and it was just, you know, and then there were large explosive events, and I have a little one-page piece from the book that I want to read, but there would be these large events about once a year, and I would always be invited to read in it. And I always felt sort of puzzled but glad, because I always felt like poetry and theater are like just friends, and theater is sort of like the poetry of many in a certain way, and that the poet is just kind of a single character from a play, sort of standing up, invoking others in a different way. So I was just always happy that I was part of the scene there. And then I think one of my plays, Feeling Blue, I had like the workshop production of it at WOW. So it's just, you know, like I always felt kind of sort of just different, because, you know, as we were both, everybody's saying, we all always feel different, and I always felt like I had a different relationship, but I definitely felt like I was the poet of the place, and that it was cool that the place needed and wanted a poet, you know. And so I'm going to read a teeny piece from the WOW book, and then I'm going to wander a bit through some poems and a little teeny piece of prose. And I'm going to end it with something, because what's weird is that in 1992, I ran for president. And I ran for president because George Bush came to Ann Arbor in 1991, and he made this speech about the politically correct. And at that minute, it's sort of like, set the newspapers on fire, because it was basically language from the left had been imported over to the right. And people said that this meant that the 92 campaign was going to be about freedom of speech. And when I read it, I was doing certain kinds of improvisational performance at the time. And I was 40 years old, and suddenly I thought, oh my God, I could run for president and kind of enter the campaign and do these same kinds of improvisational performances, and yet I would have a political mission just by the very job that I had, which was to be a candidate, and I began it. So Ann Arbor basically started my presidential campaign. So just before the election, a few days before the election, there was an amazing event on the High Line in New York, which was that Zoe Leonard read a great piece that was in some way linked to my campaign, and she wrote a piece called "I Want to Die President," and it was just like all the kind of beautiful wrong kinds of presidents that she wanted, and it became like a big broadside on the High Line that I can't remember what, I think the High Line Art Corporation or whatever put it up there, and it was a very exciting thing. So 2 days before the election, there was a big event in which a whole bunch of us came and performed and read, and it was really terrific. And I was encouraged to do something about my campaign, and so he said, why don't you act as if you were running for president today? And so what I did was I wrote an acceptance speech, and basically, you know, and so I'm going to end up with that. So this is my statement about WOW, and this is my bottle of water. You know how squishy bottles have gotten, right? It was just kind of a creepy feeling when you grab it. It's like better for the planet, but not so good for my hand. Wow, women in their own words. Oh, I guess maybe that's the section. And I'm one. The first WOW festival in 1980 seemed like the coolest lesbian bar I had ever seen. Everyone was droll and far out and stylish and druggy. It was really electric and alluring. And then there was the skinny wow on East 11th Street. That's where I first saw Hawley's The Well of Horniness. And if, I mean, like that was like the play that put Hawley on the map. It was just The Well of Horniness. It seemed like such a huge play for such a small place. The occasion of her play gave me hope because the play was campy and ironic and cheesy and over the top and mostly just smart and funny. It established a feeling for how lesbian culture could be. I was a little nervous about this wonderful temporary lesbian festival being planted in this skinny little theater place. But once I saw The Well of Horniness, I realized that the size of the space was not the point at all. What was important was how unlike any other space it was and how much you felt like you were seeing and hearing something new from Dykes. By the time WOW was on East 4th Street, I was really impressed with their own theater. Because I was and am a poet, I never thought of it as my space. Here's my disclaimer again. I love to disclaim. It's my sense of power as my space. But these were the theater people who were like me. I saw Diane Tour's first drag pieces at WOW and took part and was naked in front of an audience for the first time and then slipped on a big dick. And saw the 5 lesbian brothers, which on first viewing struck me as genius, as, say, Nirvana or Jefferson Airplane. A group had slipped into something bigger than its parts. A genius called the 5 lesbian brothers had occurred. I've always been enraged by how much WOW isn't New York, in a way. I've seen so many firsts there, so many stunning nights of theater and total avant-gardism and kitsch and darkness, and yet the work at WOW is never regularly reported in the Times or The Voice. Nevertheless, WOW strikes me as the preeminent theater space of its time. Cafe Chino in the 50s or 60s was puny and only so historic because men did their early work there. If we can survive lesbian theater being lesbian and treat it as such, then we will probably have surmounted the greatest obstacle ever thrown in the path of a human being. To be a female human being talking about loving or hating, but mainly obsessing on other female humans, is to ultimately derail the greater purpose of the birth process, which is to create men. WOW is a abysmal. That's what all abortion is about, right? It's not about preventing the murder of women. It's preventing the murder of men. WOW is an abysmal failure on an historic scale and that has ultimately produced decades of dangerous and vital women. Oh. And now I just want to ramble a bit. And so I just thought I'm going to read a teeny piece from Chelsea Girls. And I think a lot of, every time you do a reading, I feel like it's about the moment. And I just feel like we're in this leafy, dark, sad time. What is the latest, I was telling Lisa, the latest crazy thing that Trump said? Somebody burned a flag in front of the White House, and he said that people who burned flags are now going to lose their citizenship. He's like, so insane. It was just like, will we? It makes me want to burn a flag. I've never burned a flag. I was like, seriously? Forget all that. It's so easy to give up, to live in dreams with yourself instead of in stories with a friend. What I wanted to say was that everything I'm reading, I don't necessarily believe, but it feels true. It's so easy to give up. You write something and it's true when you write it. And then it's not true anymore, but it still feels true. It's so easy to give up, to live in dreams with yourself instead of in stories with a friend. I distrust dreams. It's just your brain restirring information uselessly, fending for itself in another dimension, making movies of its own fears, and you wake up horrified or calm by something that never happened or dissatisfied, and you go back down for more, which is all you get. Dreaming is like getting drunk alone. The less you live, the more you dream, the more fantastic and outrageous the dreams get. I bet that that's all dead people do, dream endlessly, and dreams are death in training. It would be different, say, when you wake up terrified and there's someone there and you tell them the bad one. Dreams in movies and dreams in books are cheats, either made-up ones where the writer is too cowardly to tell the story she means, or else she has had this dream and thinks it is important to tell everyone about it when really the only person who really cares is one lying next to you in bed. See, I think people, first of all, I love dreams now. I wrote that when I was in my 20s. And I also think dreams are really important, and you should tell everybody your dreams. I mean, I think I heard about some male writer who made a rule at breakfast in his family that nobody was to come to the breakfast table and tell their dreams. And I thought, that is one of the most patriarchal, fucked up things I've ever heard in my life. You know, you should always come to breakfast and tell your dreams. And this is called School of Fish. Everything's equal. Cherry Jones did this poem on Transparent, but I've got to say, she did a good job, but I'll do a better one. I'm taking it back. Everything's equal now. Blue leash, blue bike, blue socks covering my ankles today. What about my friend? I never wear socks. For a week or two, she lived in the streets, and it was such an illumination. What's this human addiction to light? One morning, I dreamt about homelessness, joked about it. Life reduced or expanded to getting Doggy her very next can. Dog's inexcusable addiction to eating. At the bottom of the sea, David said the fishies are inexcusably addicted to light. Same day, I and my dog were left on the street. No home, no keys, streams of pouring gray rain. Now, what is this gray in relationship to blue? Ask some painter, is it less light or is it what? What kind of hat should I have worn yesterday in my crisis? The dog's blue leash was gone. My feet reaching over the bounds of the sidewalks, its curbs and waves, pavement splashing up hard and gray. Where did I see that man? Someplace so human, they even had one of them in a dark blue t-shirt laughing. There is nothing to my anecdote, my predicament, my color crisis. There is nothing but blue and gray. A glint hits a golden key, and it's a bad one, not the original. And I kept turning and turning. There was copies everywhere in the neighborhood. That's what I'm trying to say. I simply walked, and the apologies kept coming, streaming in. And I said, and I simply walked, and the tree turned. No, the key. And the bottom of the sea is flooded with light. We just get used to it. The deeper and deeper we go, and the harder it is to turn the key. And eventually we go, and it is very, very dark. We just get used to the light, but the blues and the grays and the feelings of lostness, it's like home. It's like family. And here's a couple of new poems, and these are sort of illustrating a love story. And so there's that moment when you're hot, when you're in love, and you're just so high, and all you can do, you just walk down the street making a list, and you're like, isn't this amazing? You know? So this is like that. This is called You. I'm bravely eating my croissant at everyone. I'm living on my wet board. I'm living on my money, limits set and the lights lower. I worship the blue marks on the hydrant. How like the name of a flower. And this is later, it wasn't so good already. This is called television. And you're watching the Emmys alone, and then you're like, watching Game of Thrones, and you think, oh, okay, I see myself in this. I guess I'm very attached to the small boats moving across the deep blue sea in a world much older than ours, but maybe the same. It speaks to me, the smallness of the boat, the bigness of the night. The shot is wide, and I somehow feel close. I want to speak this enormity to you. I feel like that, or I sing like that. Not modern or loose at all. I'm loose like a tiny boat in a wide cove, opening out into a bigger body of water. I relish the small ripples like lines that hold my boat. It's so quiet in the morning. I imagine myself seen, and what's seeing me is a forlorn love. Can you understand this at all? It's kind of lost in a color or a tone, something really old and bound up with everything in the moving picture. And then I am gone. It changes into day or a cartoon, but for the stretch of that voyage, I am known. Now it's over. So it's the longest poem. It's called Sweetheart. It's like a bad genital. It's just like Fresca's got a new look, but I'm not drinking that. My Coke struck the ice and the ice cube cracked. I'm sitting by the little Buddha who is sitting in my yard. I imagine you walking in, gasping at the same couch, the same bed. It's almost the same town, but this is what I meant. And there's so much pleasure, difference in this, that. I meant to be here. One sleeps on what they mean and arises on the decided side, and that's the hope. An entire room is opened by particular feelings that say you're on the edge of the space, and then you wait to watch it grow. grow like a love or a feeling of distrust, or a body grateful for sun and breeze and the rising and falling of my dog's chest? No, gut. The little Buddhas smiling southeast, I figured that out. Their genitals are unknown. In fact, they're everything smiling, walked on by ants, planted in the dirt but not dead, activated by my gaze. Their smiling makes me glad. Dog turns Buddha's way. I go forward with confidence. I may turn nothing up but this gentle scratching in my yard before making a call, opening the self somehow so it's possible to have a friend to call, not only from need but interest in their life, the body I'm pouring into, joyous to be connected to someone, well, covered by ants, surrounded by breeze, actually touched by birds, their sound, then landing. There is nothing romantic in their absence. The bird is all touch, no matter how distant their flight. The sky is open. My gaze is wide. It matters how they dive and hover. The silly cluck, the ninny, constant, the hoot makes the gray sky blue, trees, brown, green, slanting trees, the woman dying in her face thought, am I recording? But it was the young man counting everything, Cora Crete, whose art I liked so much last weekend in Sydney, performed Bird in the dying woman's sky, so his quote was reverential, that she could be copying anything by dying was more about him. A mustache on the sound that life's made of. I don't think you don't miss me, and I think you don't miss me enough, or you regard me as seasons that simply come. And it's true, I'm everything. I used to love so much to show you my poems, but everything's not enough. You have to go out and shake everything's hand, and the tremendous feeling of everything is not shook enough. I'm sick of being God for you. I'm not the fresca or the Buddha or the bird. I'm the ice that cracks. I'm really feeling it now. The amazing difference of contact, everything's gasp. It begins so slow. Hours of freezing, waiting a life and the draining of it by waiting too long, riding around in a car. I'm not any Coke, I'm every Coke. And a bird likes the sound of that, to be so close the earth parts for its own arrival. The time of day is enchanted by my jeans on the line. I'm enchanted by everything too. How could I be it and feel it? Drawing sun lines, sticks. If I say two again and I'm creating a pattern, someone who doesn't love me will say, you say two too much. I suppose going blind is momentarily seeing colors in everything and remembering them for the rest of your life. I'm afraid to tell you I'm going blind. What I'm saying is I'm retiring from God. I will feel my genius quietly, the furrows of a dead tree accepting my love. You start like a car and pepper in a number of growls. That's dog. You roll in your bird, and Buddha's difficult now, more of an aside. There's something so different as the sun could turn, I think, and we're turning on our dirty little urn. There's a movie about everything. My getting this part of that endlessly obliged to be wise. Upstairs, 16 little eggs turn in another galaxy, someone else's sandwich. Today, I was so busy, I didn't even see lunch. I had it, but I didn't see it at all. The distant eggs are turning for someone else. I poured Fresca into my glass, and then I poured my vodka, and then I got drunk. Darker day now, when my throat fills and Buddha's awake. A bee wants to sing, a bee wants to sting me, and in that moment, I would notice everything. Why do you think I'm sweet? Why must I die? Yes. One more short poem and then the speech. And this one is just kind of, I don't know if it's new or old, but I just discovered it and I'm really into it. And I've never read it before, so it's yours. It's called The West. There might be nothing. The section of the paper I save for later about buildings, the home, inside, outside too, the yard, the garden, things that do well. What I have in mind. And my favorite radio show is Garden Compass. It's like gossip about someone else's life and how to save them and their plants and their flowers. It's like Eloise. The road is long, I mean it. All I need is to hear a certain designer plans to be alone for the rest of his life, and I think, I'm like him. And I'm dying to see that movie, how he does every little thing. It's as simple as being a sculpture having a life. This is not the book of instruction I had intended, but this is when the emptiness noticed its own beginning, like that church I saw when I was young. that was simply melting. This is for those who would not name that building, but simply step in, noticing when that has happened. An elaborate piece, like being a candelabra, that is the road you are on. I thought, bring your camera. I thought, don't bring your camera. That's what I mean. There will be plenty for everyone, and my style is adequate to that. Has been planning this moment for years, ushering it in. Tonight, I will do books. I am leaving my house. Which ones do I need? I think you can come on the long and horizontal road of reading. Did you love that, or was it like, what the fuck? It's always a gamble, right? The problem with being a poet is it's completely PC. You never go, room. You go, room, and you look up, have a drink of water, and then you go, room, and then you're like, it's like a very jerky profession. Okay. So this is my acceptance speech. First of all, I want to say this feels incredible. To be female, to run and run and run and not see, just bear in mind, I started running in 1991. To run and run and run and not see any end in sight, but maybe have a feeling that there's really no outside to this endeavor, this beautiful thing. You know, we don't have a single female on any of our bills. And what about two women loving, or even more? A lot of women, a lot of money. Is there a message I missed that the face of woman can't be on our money? And what about that house I just won, that white one? When I sit there, and if I sit there, and I gotta tell you, I'm not so sure I wanna sit there. Some of you might remember my first campaign. Yes, that was back in 1992. Few men have run for 24 years. 25 by the time I stand and take the oath in January to serve my country. I did not quit. I stand here with you on this beautiful, rapturous, sunny day in New York to turn around, to look back, and look at all that we've won. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's get back to that house, that white house. Somebody just blew their nose, it was so great. We often hear that white house, could you do it again? It was like, we often hear these words, even as an explanation of what metonym means. Are you familiar with this term? Yes, I promise you, poetic presidency. The White House speaks is a metonym. Certainly that White House we speak of is not the whole government, but it has come to be a symbol of it. And I think two things. I think whiteness, I think of the whiteness of the house, and I think of houseness. It houses the government. Now that I have won, it offers to house me now. I now officially make that White House a homeless shelter. It is a complete disgrace that we have people without homes living on the streets of America. I have lived with them, not for long periods of time, but in the same way that I'm the first president who knows what women feel, because I am a woman, I am one. I have also eaten chicken with the homeless. I ate at the Bowery Mission, very rubbery, very chewy chicken. Those chicken were not happy when they lived, and they are no happier being chewed on dead at the Bowery Mission. And the chewers are not happy either, no. So here's the future, good food at the White House for all the homeless in America. You know who the homeless are. They are military men and women who fought our pointless wars, who came home after each stupid, greedy war we have waged, and they got less. Is there a GI Bill for veterans of Iraq and Afghanistan? I'm not sure, but I don't think so. Can they buy a house? Who can buy a house? Under Miles, they have bought the White House. That is my gift. The White House will house the mentally ill, outpatiented during the great President Reagan, meaning he threw them out of the house, threw the mentally ill people out of the American house, and the alcoholics who do not have free and abundant and available treatment, because this country breaks our hearts. We will habit them too. We will occupy all government buildings and memorials, housing and holding and loving the homeless and the sick and the starving. We'll do what the statue says, you know, liberty. We will take buildings, we build buildings, and our culture and our new America will begin to live. Our government needs to be in the business of living, not dying. What else is a government for? The government will become more departmental and take you in, you and your wonderful needs. We will start with the Department of Women. Obviously, to say women matter, go ahead, you can applaud, that's okay, that's cool. Obviously, to say women matter and do matter so much and a lot, we need a distinct place in the government to specifically focus on female concerns, which is parity, mainly, reforming Congress, so that if America is increasingly diverse in a multitude of ways, our Congress must represent those groups percentage-wise. That's smart, don't you think? So if most of the people in America are female, so should be our government, right? America is not a department store. We want to do more in our country than shop online and at the mall. Let's face it, everyone is home shopping and yelling at each other on their computers. The malls are falling apart. The malls are pretty much gone. Let them go. We want to make real departments for who we really are, not shopping. We will be stalwart. We will be strong. Let's go. Let's go out. We are out there now. We are there on the High Line. Yes. Well, actually, we're in Ann Arbor, but forgive me. That's the way it works under Miles. Early on, I described a Department of Culture. We will have that. We will have art in America, not just a magazine, just the starters. We will multiply the budget of the NEA by tenfold. We will bring back CETA. That was like an arts workers program we had in the 80s, but we will call it CETA. CETA what? I don't know. I just got elected. I haven't worked everything out. But just think of the possibilities. See the sky, see the river over there, see the Whitney. A lot of people will be walking around appreciating, and we will pay them. There will also be the hear the program, the smell the program. That's probably what you're going to do early on with all those, recovering veterans who don't have to live on the streets. Get them in on the see the, smell the, hear the programs. We're going to massively fund libraries, open 24 hours, and they will not be filled with homeless people because they will have homes. So the libraries will be filled with people reading and watching movies and going into the conversation rooms and having conversations and so on. All education will be free. Trains will be free. Cars will eventually be banned. Cars are stupid. No more pumping oil, no more fracking. Everything will be driven by the sun or else will be plugged in electrically. Electric something. There'll be lots of free food, a lot of archery. Everyone will be a really good shot. We'll get good at aiming, intentions, not killing. Oh yeah, and we'll send a lot of masseuses to Israel and Palestine. Everyone needs a good rub. No more pesticides here, anywhere. Lots of small farmers, an amazing number of stand-up comedians, and lots of rehearsal spaces and available musical instruments and learning centers for people like myself who would like to play something, perhaps a guitar. Nobody would be unemployed. Everyone would be learning Spanish or going to the sex center for a while, having ejaculation contests. Or just looking at porn for a while and going out into the yard and helping the farmers improve the crops. Just gardening, helping the flowers, distributing the flowers. See the flowers. When in doubt, always just being a see the person for a while. There'll be a whole lot of people encouraging people to see the. We want the see the to thoroughly come back. There'd be an increase in public computers like water, like air. Have we stopped the oil and fracking early enough to protect the water and air? We hope so. But there will be a decrease in private computers with an enhanced desire to be here, exactly here where we are, which some would argue is there on the computer, which of course would be allowed. But being here will be cool. Some people meditating, other people just walking around, smiling, feeling good about themselves, living shamelessly and glad. Guns would be buried. Guns would be in museums, and people would increasingly not want to go there. Gun museums would die. What was all that about? Money would become rare. I would have a radio show as your president, and I also might be on television, and also I just might want to talk to you. In the tradition of American presidents like Fiorello LaGuardia, the little flower, I would be President Edward Miles, the woman. Changing my name very often would probably be good. I would like that. And I would write a new poem for you each week. I would just walk around saying, and eventually you would forget I was the president. I would go to the gym. There are people who like to manage things just like there are people who like to play cards, and the managers would change often enough and they would keep the parks clean. America increasingly turning into one big park, one big festival of existence with unmarked toilets and nightly, daily events and free surfing lessons and free boards, just put it back when you're done, and a good bed for everyone. I slept in the best bed last night, and I slept on the plane today. Sleep is great. Nobody would be short of sleep. Everyone would be well slept, chaotic and loving-hearted, and have all the time in the world to not kill, to love, and be present. And everyone take your turn and dance. Dance now. I love my fellow citizens. It is good to win. Thank you. I feel like I had a bad dream last night that like the head of the FBI decided to steal the election by making shit up about me. Because I am female, but that wasn't true, and we are really here, undiluted, unmucked up, wide awake in America for once. Thank you. Thank you.
I'm on. That was what incredible readings from Lisa and Eileen, and a great way to end the conversation. It wasn't really a conversation, but it could have been.
Is that how we ended the
The end of the conversation. So we.
Is my mic on? Yeah. Okay.
It's on-ish. Do we have some questions, comments, manifestos? Maybe not any of those. No. Everything is clear now. That's good.
We could start among ourselves,
Yeah,
but
we
maybe,
could start among ourselves.
But if like maybe we should give them a minute, right? Maybe somebody is like thinking about something and they just feel like, is this too weird? It isn't, right?
Right. Are any of us thinking about anything? I also can't see anything, so I wouldn't know if you were thinking or having a question or having a hand up, so you have to like...
There's a hand.
Okay, so make yourself... Hey, Callie McKee, yes. Do we have an extra mic? Do we have... You can have a... You're loud.
Yeah, thanks. So,
We'll repeat the question for the live stream, right?
Yeah. Thanks. My mom.
had little, not maybe a God play, but little goddess moments right there. So thank you for all that. And I have so many questions, but I will try to just ask, as out lesbians and as performance artists, how did that, as you were coming out and as you were writing and making sense of all of that, how do you think that informed your writing? I know that's a huge question, but how do you think kind of coming to terms with your own identity inspired how you wrote? So, you both have a lot of, like a lot of humor in your writing, and I just wondered if that affected, how you wrote, the style in which you wrote, and, choosing to go out and be on the stage by yourself, and kind of, that's my question, I guess.
Hey, is it possible to have more light? Because maybe we want to see them.
Oh, put the light on the audience too, right? So we should all be in the same room
What?
now.
Yeah.
Right?
we
Open
could-
house lights up.
Yeah. Is that possible? I'm not sure.
We don't know.
We don't know. Again, it doesn't seem to be happening.
Is there somebody
Is it
back there
happening?
in the booth? Tell them.
Is it happening? It's happening slowly. Ah! We're old. We need it to happen more quickly. So, Callie asked a great question about coming out and art making. Yeah. Does somebody want to?
Well, I never thought I was going to be a writer. It never occurred to me. Yeah, I would have probably said it would be more likely that I'd be a brain surgeon than I would be a writer. And so in the beginning at WOW, I just, the first thing I did was a variety night, and I had told funny stories sort of the whole time. My family likes to tell a funny story, and so I had a lot of anecdotes. And I also had some kind of funny little songs that I did. And so a friend Claire Moed said, you should come and do a variety night at WOW. And so I came and sang this Victorian novelty song that I used to do at auditions that I had a tap break in the middle of it. And then I just told these stories. And so then I started to make performances doing that. I'd sort of make an outline of the stories I was going to tell. And there were a lot of performance spaces in the East Village. So, I do things at WOW, but also go to all these other little performance spaces. And eventually, first of all, I started making work with the brothers, and we wrote collaboratively. But, at some point, sort of deep into making, I started putting together sort of full-length shows of telling stories and, whatever I thought was going to be funny on stage. There was one show where I had a reducing machine that I had bought at an auction upstate, one of those things like from the Dick Van Dyke Show where it has like the belt and you turn it on and it goes like that. And I put that on stage at PS 122, and that was a great moment in art, as you can imagine, for me to stand on that thing. And but I think I started to write because at some point I wanted to, I sort of trained myself by, I would see these people and, I was thinking when Holly was talking of like the incredible vivid memories I have of watching The Lady Dick night after night and thinking, I can't understand what this is, but it is magic. And it's so beyond me. There are things in this that I want to figure out how they're made and how to do them. And I did that as a performer, and I did it as a writer, figuring something out and then seeing somebody and thinking that thing that they know how to do. I don't know how to do that. And I remember watching Deb Margolin one time and thinking she's funny, but there's something else. There's this other thing that's has resonance to it, that's about something deeper. I don't know how to do that. So to get to those things at a certain point, I kind of had to start to write to learn those things. So, all that came from the world of WoW, and the thing about WoW was that you didn't have to explain your lesbian identity. That was the politics of it, as opposed to, and I think that even now when I watch work sometimes by people, I think that there is nobody ever justified. We didn't have to explain our existence. We weren't in an argument about our legitimacy. We weren't justifying ourselves or describing who it was that we were. We started from that place of our identity as a central place for a point of view, and then we made work from that place. And I think that it's, sometimes I see work by artists who are lesbians who haven't been inside lesbian culture, and they want to write from that point of view, and they're sometimes I have the sense that they can't. They haven't yet quite learned their own centrality. They haven't owned their right to their self as a place, a legitimate place for their point of view.
I guess it's funny. I'm thinking about writing, and I'm thinking about being a lesbian at the same time, which, of course, I feel like was the revolution, right? It was just like I started to write before I was queer, and I sort of knew there was this thing going on, and yet I was actually fearful about getting caught like in a female world, before I was a poet. I had like homophobic feelings and also ambitious feelings and stuff, and so I started to write, and then at whatever point I realized that this thing was actually, that I had a secret in my writing. And the thing about writing, it's so funny, is you always have a secret. There's always something you're not saying, and it's actually creating the form of the work. So for a while, my secret was that I was a dyke, and I was writing these poems, and I was being I thought I was being sort of John Ashbery-ish about it, and then at some point, at whatever point, I finally, it's so weird, C.A. Conrad just did a, like at St. Mark's Church, they're having like their 50th anniversary this year, and so they're having this retrospective event, and a lot of people went into their archives and listened to these readings from the 70s, and they found this reading from the 70s, which is me coming out, basically. Like in 1977, I just did this love reading to this woman, Rose, who's a pal of mine now, and I just saw her really recently at the Miami Book Fair. And it was so strange to think, oh my God, this was it. This was the cause. But it was sort of like, and so, it's so funny because I've written about that moment, but somebody was, a friend of mine who's like, C.A. Conrad's a great poet and total queer. And he was like listening to this ancient recording of this person just like shaking. But it was like, when I did that, my work sped up. It was just like, there was all this energy. I mean, I think there are all these moments in writing where you just like, suddenly you just figure out something that's stopping you, and you push that aside, and suddenly you're just going forward with so much. I mean, I had that later on with like my alcoholism. When I stopped drinking, I was like, what? It's like the room became political, my body became present, I became somebody else. But I think for me, that's the step of and it was just, and I think that like, and also it's just like to work, like say to be a poet in a all poet sort of avant-garde space, or to be a lesbian playwright or poet in an all-lesbian space, is to have this beautiful, it's like having a childhood. You're not thinking that this is weird experimental work. You're just thinking this is the work that we do. This is who we are, and the same thing with the dyke space. We're not thinking, yes, we're thinking about being queer, and everybody's thinking about who they have a crush on and so on. But it's sort of like, but the more important thing is the way, I think, the level in which you're not thinking about it. Because you don't feel like somebody's looking at you. You're just developing in a space where there's no hindrance. It's almost like the I Ching or something, you find yourself, and it's like, and that's one of the most important things in the world. I think we all need that in every kind of group that we identify, whether it's about age or race or sexuality. It's like you need to be hidden in the world, and you also need to be in a huddle with your own, and it's like, and those are like brief or long periods of time, but it's got to happen. I feel like that rhythm has to be, you have to have a place where it's sort of like, oh, it's just us chickens here, It's like if you don't have that, you're always kind of wondering what everybody thinks about you, You're always in that kind of, second guessing yourself,
So I came to performance and writing after being, well, I had some performance and writing experience when I was in, what we used to call junior high. Calling it middle school doesn't help. It's still terrible. Still a terrible time. And I dealt with it by writing these monologues, using that well-known theatrical device of being on the end of a conversation. And you get the sense of what the other person is saying and misunderstanding what the person is saying. And so I'm talking to a man who is rejecting me over and over again and, telling me how homely I am. And, I mean, it's just like, it just poured out of me at Christian Leadership Golf Camp that I went to. And I went from being like a nothing kind of art nerd to being incredibly popular by performing these monologues of rejection. And I thought, like, maybe it'll even be better, like, if I, and I just thought I was, like, the ugliest, weirdest thing on the planet. But maybe I can, like, amp that up, Maybe I can even more unflattering. And suddenly I had, like, a social life. Like, I got invited to birthday parties of cool kids who would ask me to perform my monologue of rejection. But then, the other thing didn't happen. Like, I was that person. Now I was even more that person. I would get a piece of cake from the cool girl, and I would sit in the corner. I thought, but maybe but I sort of liked it. I thought, well, this is my territory. I'm enjoying this. And but theater and writing that I experienced in high school was about musical theater. I have no musical ability, whatever. And so I didn't go near theater when I was in college, and I sort of had some aptitude in visual art. So I thought, and I just knew I had to be some kind of an artist because I was just, I don't know, that was the only sort of place to put myself. And I heard this amazing story in a drawing class that I still like. It's like the best story about being an artist that I've ever heard. And I kept wanting to have it with my drawing teacher. Teachers used to smoke, and he would like stalk around in the drawing class, which was, it was also great to be like a drawing student because you got to look at naked people for long periods of time and try to figure, which was so rare in the 70s, to have that unobstructed, investigatory gaze. And you could look at them quickly and slowly and, making little dashes. And it was wonderful. So, and this guy would like walk around with his cigarette and his hair falling in his eyes, and he would talk about that he was an artist. He wasn't just our teacher, and he had turned his garage into a studio, and he was a sculptor, and he was working on this sculpture, and we'd hear all about it. We'd hear about the night, the music, this jazz, and the Michigan night, and whiskey, and the sculpture that he just couldn't finish because it was abstract, and how did you know it was finished? And then one night, it was big, it was metal, it was difficult. He decided it was too beautiful, that was what was wrong with it. And he got into his Jeep, and he drove into it. And I was like, that was it. That was what I wanted to do. It wasn't just that I wanted to drive into things and break them, which I did want to do, and I continue to want to do. Right. And if you look at my car, you see that I have done that. But I wanted to be I wanted to be the car, I wanted to be the cigarette, the music, the night. I wanted to be all of that. And I was knocking at that door of visual art for a while and came to New York. but I was like, the life of a visual artist was, speaking now as someone who teaches in the School of Art and Design, was so not appealing to me. The sort of solitary time and sort of monosyllabic, interactions.
Except they can listen to music, which I'm really jealous of.
What? You could listen to
They
music?
can listen to music.
They could listen to
They're
music.
in their studios listening to music working. I'm like,
Right.
what is that like?
I know. But if you don't really like music, I mean, if you could live for long periods of time without it, it's not that great. And I loved, if you think like it's fine for other people, I feel like Quentin Crisp, who said like, when he was young, music was something you did privately, like urination. You did it in, it was like the world was silent. You went to symphony halls, were insulated. Anyways, I came to WOW and said that I was a visual artist, and then I looked around, and there was no backstage. You were on stage, and you had to do it. And this woman who looked like James Dean told me I had to make a show or get out, and the rest of the world wasn't going to take me back. So there was some definite being in that community space, being in that sort of world, allowed me to come out, and I think got me closer to the dream of smashing a car at night in a Michigan garage.
This story really reminds me of a central thing to me about WOW, which was that one of the things that I felt was missing from my work, it became clear to me, was, there was no part of me growing up that ever thought about smashing a car. I was a good Midwestern girl. That's my essential nature. And to be in this, and so I was drawn to this place where this work was so vivid, and that impulse was central to the work that was being made. That kind of explosive wildness that allowed all these incredible things to happen on stage. And there was a really amazing moment to me where I had a conversation with Peggy Shaw. The brothers had made their first play, and then we were trying to figure out if we could tour. So I said to Peggy Shaw, so do you think that we could tour this show? And she was like, oh, yeah, totally, totally. And Split Britches had, been to London a lot. And I said, do you think we could take it to London? And she was like, absolutely, absolutely. And I said, well, how do I do it? How do we do it, And she said, well, you fly to London, and then you go to the Dyke Bar, and you tell them you have a show. And then they'll hook you up. And I said, oh, okay. And where would we live? And they're like, oh, just ask, somebody will let you sleep on their floor. It'll be fine. And I was like, oh, okay, all right. And then we'll be able to do a show. And they're like, yeah, probably in the bar you can do your show. It'll be great. You should totally do it. And I said, and we'll be able to make enough money to buy food. And she said, you steal your food. And I was like, oh, I see. These are the true bohemians. They are really they're up there. But I am not, it's always going to be aspirational for me to have that be the motivating thing.
So it's weird. I tell that story about that moment in a classroom and being transformed by this teachers urging us to explode your idea of beauty. And now I'm in an institution, and I feel like so much of what something on our syllabus has to be a tagline about faculty stewardship and mentor, and facility maintenance, and clean up after yourself, don't burn anything down, and that seems wrong.
But I just think it's interesting because I feel like so much about being a writer or an artist is about failing into other genres, because I just grew up and I was all about art, and I was supposed to go to art school, and the suggestion was that I wasn't very bright and my brother was smart and I was the art kid, but I went to this horrible Catholic high school that didn't have art. So it was the two things I was good at, like sports and art. Catholic school had neither a gym nor we had. I mean, it was just crazy. I never had gym in my life, you know, and it's just like I'm totally into going to the gym, but no art class. So all there was a sad art club, and what that meant was some kid from Mass Art would get on the bus and go out to the suburbs where I went to Arlington Catholic High School and sit after school with the 3 or 4 girls who were making their portfolios for art schools and help them get their portfolio together. And that's all it was, you know, and I just thought, oh, this is really bad. But then I discovered one of my functions, which was to give them titles for their art, you know, because they were doing these abstract paintings, and they were like, what do you think that would call? And he was like, well, number 56 or something. And I was like, no, short circuit. And they were like, wow, that has pizzazz. And so I was all kind of like these great free form, and I I have this facility to make titles, you know, and it really changed everything, because it was like what was fun about going to art club was giving them these like little word tidbits.
Do we have another question?
Because we're going to drive this one into the ground.
So, yeah. Okay.
Done.
Yeah, done. We're old and deaf, so really.
You're an admirer of all three of us, so thank you for this presentation.
I wanted to ask for all of you to comment on what Holly had alluded to, this sort of generation gap at WOW, or what's maybe changed from the time that you're, the good old days of the 80s to the currently existing institution. One of my first experiences at WOW, my first sweat equity was running the door at an event that the policy was to make anyone who looked like a man wait outside to make sure that all the other seats were filled by women. And so I was, made to be like a gender policing person, and I was very uncomfortable with this rule, especially since it was not my own choice to run the door this way. And so it led to some interesting interactions, including making the director of the show's father wait very grumpily outside until he was left. But I just and I also I'm sorry, this is like rambling on, but I just saw the show Party People at the Public, which is an amazing show about another kind of generation gap within movements, and I was wondering if there was any sort of work that you're doing or that you think other people are doing that are addressing sort of the ongoing continuities and conversations and conflicts in queer women's performance art.
So I think that, I just want to say again that I don't know when you were at WOW, but, my understanding certainly of WOW, and we have someone who's doing a documentary here on WOW that WOW is now very trans inclusive, and in fact that's controversial. I mean, there are women that have left WOW because they didn't want to be trans inclusive. So, and I just want to sort of trouble the idea of the good old days for a second, because I want to, it was a really, and just return to how difficult and horrible the 80s were, and they were great. There was some great work made, but we were artists in New York when AIDS emerged, when you talked about how homelessness emerged, and various other things, the move towards mass incarceration, but also and how incredibly difficult everybody I knew was gay bashed in one way or another. Not that that has ended, but the scale of it,
coming back in style.
Yeah, coming back in style. So, but I think that I don't know that there's generation gaps at WOW. I think that there's different generations, and that the commitment that being at a place like WOW takes is something you usually can't maintain. It's usually, not always, but younger people. People commit to it for a couple of years or less, and they don't see that as a failure, particularly in retrospect. It's sort of like you have this lifespan of it, and I think
Oh, people will develop careers too, right? And people move away from a space because they don't have to do it themselves. You're actually getting
Right.
support of different. You're making money, or you have.
You have different ambitions. Your life changes in different ways. I mean, I think there's a number of people doing work that is, sort of looking back at work at the 70s and 80s, right? Younger artists that are looking and mining East Village art or the 70s or 80s, which I always have like complicated feelings about. I mean, what does it mean to have it happen when those people are still alive? But it's better that it's happening than it's not happening.
I feel like I want to manage my own archivalness rather than, you know what I mean? Like it's
Right.
just sort of like somebody will be doing some project on archival lesbians, and we'd like to come over to your apartment and take pictures of you with your archive. I was like, what? I just was like, that sounds crazy and invasive, and I don't want to perform like an archival clown for you in my apartment. Like I'm standing, it was just, what is that? But I also think this, like some of the social media right now, it's sort of like the Lesbian Her Story Archives is just like all over Instagram. And I think there's a lot of excitement, and I think, and I think some of like new theater companies like Half Straddle, which is so great, is definitely influenced and coming out of the same strain later on. There's a lot of work, I think, that seems to be the next generation, not necessarily in the same space, but addressing so many of the same issues and engaging the same audience and other audiences. I think there's a way of being lesbian in public now, hiding in public, or being kind of stirred in with other kinds of feminisms and issues and stuff, and that's pretty great.
I do want to say that I think that there's a question that maybe you're alluding to about the difficulty of having intergenerational relationships and conversations that I think is real and difficult, and that doesn't seem like there's a lot of productive thought that I see about like how to, make that happen and what keeps that from happening. The sort of attributes that are often derided by some of my colleagues and maybe sometimes of millennials are like exactly the same things that were probably said of me when I was young, and probably some of the similar thoughts that I had about people who were older or, sort of embodied by young people. And things differently at different times in your life. And I don't want to minimize that there are real changes, but that's an interesting question of how to have those conversations when it's so sort of ingrained that they're impossible to have. I mean, just that idea that there's a generation gap and that it's sort of impossible, and you stay in your own group makes it difficult. Okay, yeah.
Hi. I was just wondering specifically about the Five Lesbian Brothers, about just how you collaborated and how you explain your collaboration to outsiders.
Well, that's probably too long to go into now. TCG made a book, Five Lesbian Brothers, 4 plays, in which they published our first 4 plays, and we there's a lot of sort of introductory matter to the plays that talks about that. What I will say is that we did write them together, meaning we all wrote, we created a kind of collective consciousness in our process of writing, and I think I think we did. There's an idea that that's not possible. There's an idea that there has to be one final arbiter. I will tell you that when the brothers started writing together, I believed that was true and that I would be that final arbiter. And I was disabused of that notion in a way that I was ultimately very grateful for. I think that one thing, though, is that you can't collaborate with everybody. Not anybody can collaborate with anybody. And I think that the way collaboration, in order to have a great collaboration, you need that kind of Venn diagram of things that are different about you, but places that you overlap. And the central place you need to overlap is in terms of your aesthetic / moral values around the making of art. And that isn't necessarily something that's stated. You know, if Janine Tesori and Sam Gold and I describe what Fun Home is about, what's happening in Fun Home, we will say completely different things. And there was a period of time where I would listen to Janine talk, or I'd listen to Sam talk, and I would think, no, that's not it, that's not it. But when we were actually putting work on a stage and looking and saying, is this the right thing, we would all ultimately get to a place where we would say, you know, one thing is, we would all say, and this was an ethos that I learned in the Brothers, someone would say, let's try it this way, and instead of saying, that's not going to work, we would say, I don't understand, but show me. And then we would look at it. And then you know you have the right collaboration when you all at some point agree that's the thing. And you don't need to be able to describe it or understand it. You just need to be able to find that commonality of work. And the other thing I'll say is that you can't build a collaborative company until you've made one thing, because you have to, that trust, you know, you have to take chances while you're making something. You have to take chances. So in your first collaboration, all the time, you'll be looking at these ideas and you'll be afraid, particularly in, you know, theater, which is that long form, that long narrative form. So many things depend on other things, and every choice could either be bold and great or a disaster. And you're not actually going to know until the whole thing's put together and it's in front of an audience. And so you know, in beginning collaborations, for me, I'm always afraid, does this person have a vision that I ultimately trust? Is this going to be the right choice or not? And you just I just keep making myself trust enough to go forward. And then if you found that you made a thing that you're happy with, that works, then the next time you go into collaboration, and that's what happened with the Brothers, then you can get through those moments where you can't see something common. You can work through them, through whatever techniques you use together to trust that eventually you're going to get to a thing that feels like the right thing to all of you.
I think that's fabulous. And of course, kind of some of the student of mine have been telling her, like, you have to explain this. And she's in a collaborative group. But thank you so much. We have books to sign upstairs. Thank you so much for your incredible writing that you shared. Thank you.